Hi, I'm Benjamin Payne. At the K-12 Education Office at Hillsdale College, we support school founding groups and their efforts to start classical schools across the country. Finding the right leader is one of the first and most important steps to building a successful school. While we do consider experience in education, we seek candidates who exhibit unwavering personal integrity, honesty, courage, and servant-hearted leadership. Perhaps that's you. If you're looking to engage in fulfilling, impactful, and challenging work protecting our nation's future and building up the next generation of virtuous citizens, we'd love to hear from you. I'm looking for strong school leaders right now. Learn more about how you can make a difference at hillsdale.edu/leader. hillsdale.edu/LEADER. That's hillsdale.edu/leader.
Welcome to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, bringing you insight into classical education and its unique emphasis on human virtue and moral character, responsible citizenship, content-rich curricula, and teacher-led classrooms. Now your host, Scot Bertram.
Thanks for listening. The Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast is part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio. You also can find more information on topics and ideas discussed on this show at our website, k12.hillsdale.edu. We're joined by Colin Mullaney, who's in school leader support inside the Hillsdale College K-12 office. Colin, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Discussing today valuing virtue. Before we do, tell people a little bit about what that means, being a school leader support person in the K-12 office.
Right. Well, as you know, Hillsdale does a lot of work in supporting K-12 schools, and my particular role there is supporting the leadership of those schools based on some experience I've had in running a charter school in Colorado for many years. So I get to work with the various school leaders, talk with them through various challenges that they're having, offer some advice, and also help work on programs to support their development over the course of their careers.
So let's talk a little about virtue. How do the responsibilities of developing virtue differ between the roles of teacher and then someone who's in a school leadership position?
Right, yeah. The teacher, of course, is a leader in the classroom, and that's a very important function of the teacher. But the teacher's leadership is direct support. She's working with the students face-to-face, modeling, doing direct instruction, following up on issues, perhaps correcting students. The school leader doesn't lose all direct leadership roles or relationships, but primarily the school leader is an organizational leader. So they are working through other people. They're working with systems, they're working with policies, they're working on integrating those systems in order to create the effect that they want. And so there are various challenges that come with that, or at least it's a different context than direct leadership. There's more complexity because there are more variables. They're dealing with more people and more categories of people, so they have to take into account more perspectives and different stakes. Because of that, there's more uncertainty. So a lot of times leaders are working with incomplete information when they're making decisions. And then again, just the idea or the reality of working through systems of the organization, working through levels of the organization creates its own challenge. You have to be very deliberate in the way that the leader communicates and in forming that team that they're working with and through.
As we talk about valuing virtue, we should help to define that for listeners. When we say virtue, what do we mean? And then why does a school have a role in helping to develop that in
Absolutely.
Students?
Yeah, virtue is moral excellence. That's what we're talking about. Virtue means excellence. We're talking about the formation of excellent personal character. And that is a core function of the school. The school's role is to develop individuals who are virtuous in for the purpose of leading good lives. C.S. Lewis says, and I'll paraphrase it, but education without values, as useful as it is, seems only to produce a more clever devil. So, you can't separate the different aspects necessarily of what you're doing in education, but to do education without developing virtue would be a disservice to the students and to society at large. Virtue is what makes people truly free, and it's necessary for happiness. So as a classical school leader, we are concerned with the person themselves, not producing a person to fit a certain role in society, but their own human flourishing. And so virtue is a critical component in that.
Now, there is no virtue class at a school. There's math, science, English. There's no virtue class. So how do students learn about it? And what are the ways in which a school leader can help instill that virtue inside their students?
So virtue is taught by doing. And so we talked about the teacher. The teacher has a role in raising issues of virtue within the curriculum, and the curriculum is a really important part. That's why Hillsdale cares very much about the curriculum that schools use. What the school leader works on is setting direction for the school, defining what that end goal is for the student, which is their own human flourishing, and also defining the big movements that will get students going in that direction. The school leader also is responsible for creating the culture. Culture is critical, and the culture is the teacher. The teachers, and we'll get to this in just a second, the teachers are a vital role in that, but the culture is the soil or the atmosphere in which the students grow. The culture provides the example and should uphold, images that really spark the moral imagination and allow students to both see models and be inspired by some of those models that they see and strive to emulate those.
Culture can be a nebulous word too, right? There's no culture class. So much like virtue, I imagine students learn culture by watching, by observing, by seeing what others are doing around the school.
Yes. So culture, as you said, just has several different components. Various definitions, but it includes the artifacts and includes the shared memories and includes the values. As a school leader, you can develop culture through messaging. That's a really important way, just saying what our school is about. So we don't want people to come into the school uncertain about why we exist or the fact that we are overtly working to develop virtue in our students. So that messaging, the verbal messaging, is really, really important. It should be everywhere. It should be said with enthusiasm and discussed frequently. Students should know what it is. But that messaging, the verbal part is important, but then that needs to be enacted in the different structures of the school. So those include the curriculum, which we already mentioned, but policies. Of course, things like the discipline code, which supports the idea of virtue. Virtue isn't just a code word for you have to behave. Mm-hmm. And so we want to make sure we get that right. But the different policies of the school, the different rituals of the school, whether it's weekly assemblies, graduation, back to school nights, those are opportunities both to discuss who we are as a school and how we live out the virtues, but also just in the enactment of being together as a community and valuing certain things, honoring our country through the Pledge of Allegiance and mm-hmm. singing patriotic songs. Those kinds of things instill a culture into the community and help to develop that virtue in the students.
Come back to virtue in just a moment, but on the topic of culture and school leaders don't last forever at a particular institution. So how does a school maintain its culture through a change at the top, through a change with the school leader?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And it's a challenge for every school that does that, but it really is about creating a community culture, not just a culture that is necessarily driven by the school leader. So mm-hmm. the school leader has to create that culture, but the creation of that culture has to extend beyond the school leader. Roots have to be laid down so that the next school leader can come in and take root in that same soil, to try to extend that metaphor, but without necessarily changing the environment.
talking to Colin Mullaney, who's a school leader support inside the Hillsdale College K-12 office. Back to virtue. What are some challenges, perhaps, that school leaders do face in developing virtue in their students?
A primary challenge is the working through other people and making sure that the message is transmitted and that the culture is transmitted through the structures and the people that make up the school, that make up the culture. So that takes a really focused and rigorous effort in finding the right people and informing them well. And so one of the things that is challenging for school leaders is finding positions that not only know the curriculum, academically, but are the kinds of people that we want the students to emulate and that believe in the culture and are willing to, or believing the virtue that we're teaching and are willing to say it out loud and hold people accountable to it and to teach it directly. So one of the things that school leaders need to do in hiring staff is putting virtue first. Again, naming it directly on the job descriptions, but also talking about it very overtly in the interview and asking direct questions about a teacher's willingness to teach objective truth and to teach virtue in the classroom and to come up with specific ways that they would teach virtue within the content that they're teaching so that the school leader can discern, is this someone who is really going to add to the effort to develop virtue or not, or maybe even detract from it, which can be really damaging to a school.
We know how hard it is to find great school leaders for our schools, and listening to you talk about how important it is to hire the right people to then work on these virtues, create a culture. How do you maintain a staff once you find the right people? If you're a school leader, how do you make sure that people want to stay?
I've found that the culture and the staff themselves are a big attraction to teachers that are looking to teach in a classical school. So at the beginning, when schools are first starting, there's such a challenge in finding people and creating that culture. And my advice to schools is to stick with it, stick with the virtue, create a culture that is very clear. And a big draw for potential staff members and for staff members that are already in the school is to be part of something that they know what it is and that's truly worthy of spending their career on.
What virtues would be helpful for school leaders to utilize in their efforts to develop virtue in their own students?
Right. As you think about what school leaders are doing, they're developing this virtue. The practices that they have need to also be infused with virtue itself. And first and foremost, of course, to be a virtuous person, you need to be virtuous in all areas. And so a school leader still needs to be a virtuous person. But there are some specific virtues that can help with setting direction and creating culture and finding staff. And, they're an obvious one, of course, is prudence and justice. And those perhaps are so obvious that we don't need to talk about that. But I would say love is critical. Love is the highest virtue and encapsulates the other virtues. But specifically, love is important in setting the vision. Love is important in seeing the possibilities in other human beings and kind of in how the situation can play out for other human beings. So it's important in that direction setting piece. But love is also important, or it's really the driver of discipline. So a school leader has to be very disciplined in maintaining a culture. A lot of times I used to tell staff that, my support of the mission was often in saying no, so my yes to the mission was saying no to lots of other things.
Mm-hmm.
And that discipline in the face of disappointing people can be challenging. And if we think of it as it's just, I need to grit my teeth and be disciplined, then it's not sustainable. But if it's done in love, i.e., if it's done for a higher purpose, for the long-term well-being of the students, then that really energizes that discipline. And I would say selflessness is kind of in the same way. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of sacrifice to run a school, and it takes a lot of time, of course, from other interests and other goods like your own family and that kind of thing. So love as a driver of that self-sacrifice to a certain extent is really important.
There are parts of the school that take place outside of the school day, fine arts or athletic competitions. Are there particular ways that school leaders can make sure that the teaching of that virtue continues, even if it's not 8 to 3 or 8 to 3:30 whenever the school day ends?
Yeah, it's really important that everyone who is part of the school or is engaged with the school is really part of it. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times you might have coaches that come from the outside, but enculturating them into the school, doing the same type of vetting and upholding those values of virtue over whatever else it might be. Of course, in athletics, winning is a temptation, and of course everyone wants to win. And, mm-hmm. But winning with virtue needs to be the goal. But also being present when possible. So the school leader tends to be an embodiment of the culture, and ideally is an embodiment of the virtue that she or he wants to instill in the students. And so having that presence that is continuous, from the school day into after-school events, can help with that. And I think with a tight-knit, focused school, what I found is that not only school leaders but the staff are invested in the whole school. They're invested in the students in all of their various activities, and so it becomes a really natural extension of the school day. Not only in what the standards are, but in that many of the faculty are at the different events, and it just seems like, yes, here we are as a community mm-hmm. doing what we do. It doesn't stop when the school day ends.
One final question for Colin Mullaney. What does success look like if you're a school leader and your goal is to value virtue and to teach these virtues to your students? How do you measure this?
Success is a student who is prepared for the moral and intellectual challenges that they face, especially as they leave the school. And so preparing for that success is imagining who they can be and imagining the challenges that they're going to face, and encouraging and challenging them and teaching them, modeling for them how they might respond to those challenges.
Colin Mullaney is School Leader Support inside Hillsdale College's K-12 office as we talk valuing virtue. Colin, thanks so much for joining us here on the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast.
Thank you, Scott.
I'm Scot Bertram. We invite you to like us on Facebook. Search for Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education. You also can follow us on Instagram at Hillsdale_K-12. Hillsdale_K-12 on Instagram. Thank you for listening to the Hillsdale College K-12 Classical Education Podcast, part of the Hillsdale College Podcast Network. More episodes at podcast.hillsdale.edu or wherever you find your audio.